We're going to talk about crime and public safety in Denver. And again, every candidate will have an opportunity to talk about this issue. Some questions to kind of set the table for folks. Denver police have an authorized strength of up to 1,600 officers or so. Department is short of that number right now and looking to hire to get up to 1,600. Please raise your hand if you would like to increase the number of DPD officers beyond the 1,600, the authorized strength. Would anybody enlarge DPD beyond that? Mike Johnston, Trinidad Rodriguez, Debbie Ortega, Kwame Spearman.
And just to be clear, you're saying an increase from
an
where
increase
we
beyond
are.
where they're authorized, which would be a jump up from where they are currently.
Yes.
Next question. Denver STAR program, which sends mental health professionals to some police calls, has been widely praised. Please raise your hand if you would like to expand the work of the STAR program to answer more calls. That is everybody.
And proactive.
Denver spends approximately 20% of its budget on police. Please raise your hand if you would decrease the Denver police budget and spend some of that money elsewhere.
It depends. The audits need to happen.
Open to it based on what audits show. Okay. The Denver School Board ultimately makes the final decision about how to handle school safety. But please raise your hand if you think that DPS should bring back Denver police officers as school resource officers. Kwame Spearman, Chris Hansen, Mike Johnston, Trinidad Rodriguez, Debbie Ortega, Kelly Bruff.
I think schools should have the choice.
Schools should have the choice. Individual schools?
Individual schools.
Individual schools. And same from Kelly Bruff on that. Individual schools decide if they want DPD as their SROs. The mayor of Denver obviously wields a lot of influence in state politics, so I'm going to ask you about a couple ideas before the state legislature. Congrats to the two of you who are state legislators. Please raise your hand if you think that the state of Colorado should have some kind of ban on so-called assault weapons. That's everyone. Please raise your hand if you support expanding who can apply for a red flag order to seize guns from someone if a judge deems them to be dangerous. Expand red flag.
And enforce.
Expand red flag and enforce is what Leslie Herod says. All right, so I believe that that's everyone except for Aurelio Martinez. Please raise your hand if you support the current legislation to make all auto theft a felony and not just the theft of cars worth more than $2,000. I'll give you a second to think. Yep. Please raise your hand if you support the current legislation to make all auto theft a felony and not just theft of cars worth more than $2,000. In opposition to that legislation, I believe I saw Lisa Calderon, Aurelio Martinez, and Terrence Roberts. Please raise your hand if you support last year's change in the law to once again make the possession of 1 to 4 grams of fentanyl a felony. Do you support that change in state law?
Can you say it again?
Absolutely. Do you support the change in the law to make possession a felony again, knowing possession of fentanyl? The change that was made last year. Do you support that? I see no support from Calderon, Lisa Calderon, Jim Walsh, Ian Tafoya, Leslie Herod, Terrence Roberts.
And can I clarify that, since I voted on that bill?
Yeah, well, actually, you're going to be asked a question about why you've been on both sides of that, so just hold on real quick.
That's fair.
Okay.
Well, data shows that youth violence is going up across the state. This week, a 16-year-old was shot and critically injured outside Denver's East High School. 2 other DPS students are suspects in that shooting. This question is for Terrence Roberts. You often share your life story, how when you were young, you were involved with gangs, went to prison, and then you dedicated years of your life to keeping kids away from violence. So what should the city be doing right now that it's not doing?
I mean, I think we need more after-school programs. We need more dedicated youth spaces. So if your kid goes to the Carla Madison Center, it's full of hundreds of adults. We have a Boys and Girls Club in the Holly. We have one in Montbello. We need more dedicated youth spaces. It is up to these killers who are doing the killing. And that doesn't just mean it's gang members. Whoever it is, they have to make the decision. And poverty is the biggest precursor to violence. The biggest precursor, and I said this in my opening statement, to poverty is housing costs, it's fuel costs, it's food costs. The biggest precursor for children joining negative peer groups is domestic violence, which stems from housing and poverty. So if we addressed our cycle of poverty in the city of Denver, we have a lot of poor people in this city who live in historical communities, especially black and brown communities in Denver. A lot of our kids are going to school angry, they're going to school hungry, and they have nothing to do after school, but yet we have activities for adults to do after they get off of work, like go drink a beer or go smoke weed. I'm for the beer industry, I'm for the marijuana industry, but we need to focus on our children.
Just real quickly, though, part of your plan talks about providing free child care. How do you plan on standing that up and funding it?
I mean, just same way we're going to focus on housing. A lot of our issues stem with our housing. If we bring more sales tax into our city, installing a public banking system, making Denver a 24-hour city, bringing more trade shows to Denver, we need to make Denver a world-class city. We need to stop focusing on just affordable housing, which everybody until today was focused on, and we need to start making sure that we start using our public safety dollars to address things like child care and youth violence, because that is our #1 precursor to violence is poverty, and it's children who are mainly doing these acts of violence.
Thank you. Kwame Spearman, you staked out one of the tougher law and order stances in the race. You have called for Denver to institute harsher criminal punishments than what currently exists in state law, which is something that Republican leaders in Aurora are trying to do right now. You've said that you're open to bringing back qualified immunity protections for police officers who violate citizens' civil rights. That was an effort that Leslie Herod led at the state capitol. You've suggested that the other candidates in the race don't understand the issue of crime and don't understand public safety. What is it that they don't get?
I am a small business owner, and every day I've got to ensure that both we get customers in and that our employees are safe. And I think what I'm feeling is what Denverites are feeling right now, Kyle. We've got to have a city that has safe neighborhoods. And the incident that you talked about at East wasn't just outside of East High School, it's also outside of Tattered Cover. We've got to start enforcing our laws. We are not right now. If you have had an incident which you've had to call 911, the cops are too infrequently showing up. And when they do, they don't feel empowered to actually do their job. So yes, we've got to do all of the things to get our police active. We've got to question the judges that we've got in our city right now and how they're responding. We've got to question why our police officers are not feeling compelled to do things. And yes, some of the legislation that has been passed in 2019, in 2020, and 2021 is a part of that. And if you feel that our city is getting unsafe, that's why. And so, thank you.
Thank you. You know what? Let's do another show of hands here. You guys have been real responsive on that. Is anybody else interested in joining Kwame Spearman on this idea of talking about bringing back qualified immunity for police officers who violate citizens' civil rights? Please raise your hand if you would join Kwame in talking about that idea.
Can we talk about?
Well, and to be clear, Kyle, what I was quoted as saying is right now
You weren't quoted. I heard you say it. So what's your specific, are you interested in the idea of returning qualified immunity for police officers or no?
My understanding is for decades how the personal liability risk works is for a public official. If you knowingly violate the law, then you're personally at risk and your assets are personally at risk. That was true for police officers. So I'm just checking in on the qualified immunity. I do support going back to that because when a city settles a claim today, that officer can be personally liable, but sometimes cities settle claims with no admission of fault. Sometimes you settle claims because the city maybe had a bad policy, the officer was just following it. I don't think our officers should be at risk, and I think this is hurting our ability to recruit officers today.
All right, so Kelly Brough and Kwame Spearman on that. Under 30 seconds for Leslie Herod. You brought that bill through the state legislature, got a bunch of Republicans to vote for it following George Floyd's murder.
Yeah.
30 seconds.
And after what happened in Memphis, I heard from those state legislators, Republicans specifically, that helped us to pass that bill. Terrence Roberts was at the table as well. So was Denise Maez, who's out in the audience today. And they said, we're glad we did that in Colorado. Our people, we deserve to be safe in our cities. We shouldn't have law enforcement that feels like they can violate someone's constitutional rights. Now, I know that's not most folks because my dad's a law enforcement officer. My dad had that badge, and he did not violate anyone's rights. He started as a groundskeeper and worked his way up to the head of internal investigations.
Thank you.
Ending qualified immunity is the right thing to do. We should expect more from our officers, and quite frankly, many of them are stepping up.
Thank you.
W. Ortega, as a long-term member of City Council, you've had more direct control over the city's decisions than anyone else here. Are you and your City Council colleagues at all responsible for the state of crime and public safety right now in Denver?
So as you know, Denver is a strong mayor form of government. I have raised issues as a council member. Oftentimes, if you don't have 7 votes to get the mayor to agree and something passes, and we have passed legislation that has been repealed by the mayor or vetoed. The tobacco law, for example, was an example where that occurred. So I think clearly City Council has a different role and responsibility than the administration. And I have worked really hard to address many of these issues that we're talking about here. And sometimes I haven't been successful. I've got a bill coming to committee next week on addressing railroad safety. And we're working to make sure we've got the votes to pass it so we don't have a catastrophic event in the city of Denver like just existed in East Palestine, Ohio. I want to make sure we're doing everything we can to protect our city. I'll continue to do that as the mayor of Denver.
Mike Johnston, you raised your hand to hire more police officers. Conveniently, I checked with DPD this week, and there are 148 openings with 70 recruits in the academy. Why do you think you'll be better at hiring officers than the current mayor, and do you plan to lower the basic minimum education and character requirements to fill the jobs?
Yeah, I think the key is I've come out and say what we need are actually 200 more first responders. And the key is because there are different people you need to respond to different kinds of situations. That means you need more mental health staffers when you have someone that's in a mental health crisis. It means you need more paramedics or EMTs when someone is in a potential overdose situation or physical health crisis. And then there are places where, yes, if there are acts of violence or there are property crimes, you do need officers. So the key here is having the right public servant to respond to the right crisis. So I think you got to fully staff up that need, and then you have to be able to deploy people for the situations that have the greatest alignment. But the reason why we can recruit more is we do want to recruit them to a different kind of job than they've done so far. When people, when I talk to people in communities, what they want are officers back who are visible, who are walking the streets, who are talking to community members, who are walking into businesses, giving them their cards, talking to neighbors, asking questions. They want real community-based policing where you can reform what currently feels like being policed and put back in what feels like being protected. You can do that with a combination of both mental health support, EMTs and PAs as well as officers.
I just want to answer now on the last part. Will you be changing the minimum basic requirements to fill these jobs to get more candidates?
No, I don't think you need to change the minimum requirements. I think you have to recruit a different kind of person to do a different kind of work, which is this is really meant to be serving and protecting. A lot of people want to serve their communities. They want to have a chance to actually be a part of that community and be a part of that fabric to do it.
Thank you.
Lisa Calderon, do you think that more Denver police officers on the street would make people safer? And if not, what would make people safer?
No, I do not, and I'm speaking as someone with a law degree and a doctorate in education. It's a myth that more police on the street reduces crimes. In fact, it can increase crimes for communities of color who feel targeted. We are just 2 years from the murder of George Floyd, and we actually have more police killings now than we did before he was killed. We just had the case of Tyree Nichols, and we have to look at the entire institution of policing. First responders who are paramedics are not the same as police officers. That is a special designation with special responsibilities. And so we need to really we're past reform, actually. We're past training. I've been on use of force committees. I've trained law enforcement for 20 years. We have to have new leadership. It's interesting that we keep talking about hiring more police officers, and we don't talk about hiring more social workers or librarians or people with expertise in intervention in violence. The police lobby is very powerful, and we need to have other city workers also that we value also have those kinds of powers and respect, and to unionize other city workers.
Thank you. Chris Hansen, your new campaign ad focuses on your plan to crack down on homeless encampments and crime. The ad opens with images of 7 people of color who appear homeless and committing crimes. Can you tell us about that choice you made?
Yeah, I felt like we really needed to highlight the #1 issue on Denver voters' minds, which is people not feeling safe on the street and needing to step it up when it comes to public safety. I'm so glad we get to talk about recruitment because, we have 1,600 officers. We're way short in the police department. We're even worse on the sheriff's side. I am the only candidate up here who's been endorsed by rank and file law enforcement officers, enjoying the endorsement from the sheriffs that are part of the Teamsters Union. And I got that endorsement because what I communicated to them was I am ready on day 1 as the next mayor to reinvest and reinvigorate those departments. Our sheriff's department right now for frontline officers is down 40% headcount. 40%. Our jail is in a crisis situation, forced overtime, leading to more people leaving the department, leading to more forced overtime. We have serious work to do to improve public safety. And I'm so proud to get their endorsement in this race because I think I am the candidate who can address this crisis that we're in.
Ian Tafoya, I watched you have a physical reaction to Chris Hansen's defense of the ad featuring people of color committing crimes and experiencing homelessness.
I gotta be real honest about this. Raise your hand here on the stage if you're disgusted by an ad that makes people of color as the only criminals or the people who are overrepresented in homelessness. It is a trope that has been broken forever. There's a reason why people have PhDs in this writing books about it. I cannot believe that he would make this ad. I am so disappointed in you. We've worked on things together. When I saw that ad, I called a lot of people, and guess what? They agree with us. I hope that you will denounce it and take it away.
Thank you, Ian. Chris Hansen.
Look, I think that's fine. I took actual footage from around town. It is not just people of color that are featured in this ad. I think this is really kind of shocking that it suddenly becomes this conversation about the way that we took footage. This is the #1 issue on voters' minds. How do we improve public safety? How do we address the homelessness crisis? To have some accusation that somehow a racist ad, I think, is totally overwrought. That doesn't make any sense.
Leslie Aird.
I got to agree with Ian here. And as a woman of color, as a black woman, it's really interesting to me to have someone on the stage ignore the fact that people of color are asking you to take that ad down. It is offensive and it's scary for our communities. But I want to be clear. You didn't see what we saw because you're not us.
Yep.
But you've got to put those blinders away. You've got to have more people looking at your ads and in your administration that look like the communities you're serving. It was offensive, Chris, and as a friend of mine, I'm disappointed too.
Kwame Spearman, last thought on this before we move on.
I just want to say, I think there's actually something Lisa and I can agree on. There are more white people who are homeless on the streets of Denver right now than there are people of color. And so, Chris, you know I love you, but I couldn't agree more with Ian. If you want to use your engineering degree, you got to have statistics. And statistics are showing something that was not represented on that video.
Kwame Spearman, thank you.
Leslie Aird, we'll go back to the fentanyl legislation. You have talked about how criminalizing addiction is a failed policy, but then you voted for the new fentanyl law that makes it a felony to knowingly possess 1 to 4 grams of a drug with fentanyl in it.
Yeah.
In 30 seconds, can you explain that discrepancy?
Absolutely. The war on drugs is a failed policy. That's why I brought the bill to defelonize simple possession for folks who are addicted. You know, that is why we brought that bill forward in a bipartisan way. That's why it was supported across the board and passed the legislature. But this fentanyl bill that we brought this past year, I did support it because we were going back to felonization, going from 0, and we were able to bring that up to 1. However, as I'm looking at the statistics today, and I watched today and yesterday, as Department of Corrections asked for more beds to fill with folks who are addicted without having enough providers to provide mental health services to those people, we were wrong. We didn't get it right.
Thank you. Jim Walsh, how would you re-envision what Denver police do? How many officers? What would they do? What wouldn't they do?
I don't think more cops is a solution. I'm very uncomfortable with this notion of hysteria that there's a crime wave. I think historically, what's happened when we have that is that remilitarization of police and also the targeting of low-income communities. And that's what we're seeing more of today. The real danger we face of violence, friends, in our society is from white nationalist groups. That's the danger of violence that we face today. And that's where I think law enforcement needs to focus itself. And I want to take just a quick minute of my time to mention that we are so far behind in the movement toward harm reduction in this country compared to European countries and other nations such as Canada. Safe use space, if you go into the Harm Reduction Center today, you will see a wall of remembrance. Dozens of photos of people who have died from overdoses. If we had a safe use space, there would not be nearly as many photos on that wall. And so we have to move to harm reduction because it destigmatizes and humanizes people who face addiction.
Thank you.
Thomas Wolfe, your campaign is almost solely focused on ending encampments. I'm curious how that translates to strategies of policing. Would you seek more enforcement of low-level offenses similar to New York City's broken windows and stop-and-frisk approaches, which are more broadly categorized as zero-tolerance enforcement?
Yeah, so I'd back up on a couple of things. One was the immunity issue, which, of course, we can't have individual officers on the hook for the liability that we create because we're not going to be able to attract any more officers. The way to solve that is to have that come out of the budget of safety overall so that they police themselves. The second one we hear about is, you've heard this from City Council, you've heard this from our mayor, that we can't afford a cadet class. Our police officers is effectively a seniority system. You make more money each year. So if you're not bringing in that lowest cost part of your force, you can't not afford to do that. So that's ridiculous. Your question was specific to when I confront them. What was the?
Yeah, it's talking about your strategies of policing. Would you be looking for more enforcement of low-level offenses similar to what's happening here?
I'm speaking specifically to the encampments. When you show up, and I can go through a laundry list of trespass, vagrancy, possession, theft, public defecation, public intoxication, you name it, we're going to enforce those laws.
Thank you.
I just want to clarify something. The cadets are not officers that are on the streets. They have to go through the actual application process to become an officially certified officer. So they're going to college while they're in the program, and then they have to apply to become an officer or a sheriff or a paramedic, depending what their choice is. But we can't put them on the streets in a car doing the work that a police officer does.
Thank you.
Aurelio Martinez, I've heard you talk about more youth programming to address crime. John Hickenlooper, when he was mayor, gave kids and teens free access to Denver rec centers. That still exists today. So how does additional youth programming reduce crime and offer something Denver doesn't already have?
There's a difference between free access to youth facilities like recreation centers than there is to having an actual youth programs. Competitive team programs such as basketball, baseball, we've had that back in the days, earlier days, and there wasn't as much youth crime because they had something to do. They can be in a competitive sport that's from a recreation center and compete against each other. We used to do swimming meets from all the swimming pools in Denver. We used to have team competition. This is what's going to have to happen again to keep the youth out of the parks doing nothing except smoking legalized marijuana, okay? That is one of the key reasons why I was endorsed by Coach D, Ededra Dangerfield, and Coach Rudy Carey, two icons that deal with youth, deals with recreation. That has to come back, not just open up the centers, because then they come in, you give them a basketball, here, play. Doesn't work.
Thank you.
Kelly Rupp, your community safety plan includes a lot of the things that Mayor Hancock's administration has already been doing while crime has increased. Are you proposing any drastic changes in the way that public safety is handled in Denver?
Yeah, I'm proposing a few things. One is not only just increase STAR, but we want to get closer to that 12% of our call volume at 911 to be able to respond to those non-emergency, freeing or to mental health crisis and addiction issues, freeing our officers to respond to critical issues. Second is making our department more transparent. I think it has two benefits. By sharing more of what our officers do, I actually do think people get a better view and understanding of the full role of what it means to be a police officer. And I think what people will discover is our officers do a good job a lot of the time. And I think that will help us build trust, but I think it will also attract more people who want to be in that service role. And then the third thing is fundamentally, we talk about crime and public safety as only a response issue. I think we have to start to treat it much more like the rec center example you gave, where every single member of the team is thinking about what's their role and responsibility to reduce crime and the drivers of crime. So economic development, a great education for our kids, access not just to our rec centers, but real opportunity for our kids. They can see a future, stable housing. These are the things that we know reduce crime in the long run.
So in fairness, I asked you how you would make a drastic departure from what the Hancock administration is doing right now, and you said expand STAR, which was a universal agreement across the stage. You said better PR for police officers, and then this idea of more people paying attention. That doesn't sound like a drastic departure at all.
I don't think I said PR, Kyle, at all.
You said you want people to better understand what police do so that they would be happier with it.
Transparent. So you actually see what we're doing every single day. And it allows our department to start to address the culture of improvement that says we recognize we have to improve. We invite our community to look for that improvement, but it also allows us to really show what officers do, not just in a crisis or when things go wrong, but what we do every single day. And I do think that is vastly different. Today, departments around the nation kind of hunker down. They don't share, and we're not as transparent, and that is a significant change.
Thank you.
Trinidad Rodriguez, we haven't heard from you since the yes-no section, raising your hands. You also raised your hand about hiring more police officers.
Targeted in 2 comments. I would like to talk about those.
Well, now will be your chance, but first let me ask the direct question. Denver Police budget as part of this year's budget is $308 million. That's 19% of city spending. How much more money are you going to ask for from council, and what are you cutting to get it?
$150 million more. Our police force is the size it was in 1997, yet our city has grown by 50%. Those numbers just don't work for keeping people safe. And the answer, as a numbers guy, I love the question about how do you work the budget. The answer is we will make cuts. We'll make cuts to several specific line items. But the key thing to remember when you're thinking of these cuts is when our business comes roaring back, the tax revenue and the increase in taxable base will come with it, and we will restore all of those reductions that we implement temporarily. And the answer is we will reduce street sweeping or street plowing for Chris Hansen, and we will reduce gasoline costs because we will shift to electric.
So fewer roads getting plowed, more officers with that money.
Yes.
Thank you.
And if I could respond to those couple questions that were raised, I think we've heard 2 people talk about mental health being a bad thing, mental health disorders being a bad thing. One person called it insanity of our peers, and I don't agree with that. I think a clinically diagnosed mental health disorder is something to be treated. That is not something that's not blaming someone. That's just a reality. And then the second comment that was about the field treatment hospital. We can provide high-quality field treatment hospitals that are like Betty Ford, and that's exactly my vision.
Thank you.
Thank you.